I'm joined now by Mark Geragos. He's the defense attorney for Lyle and Eric Menendez and a good friend of the show. So, Geragos, I know you've been busy in court all day, but this is the first chance I've had to actually talk to you since not only the podcast, but also what Hochman's response was. I'm not sure it was a response because I think he says he didn't actually see or hear the podcast. I think he was just told about it. But what do you make of this?
Well, I jokingly say that Nathan Hochman, who I've known of for many years, was elected because the 90s were calling and they wanted their DA's office back. And he did a splendid job of rehashing all of the 90s prosecutorial kind of platitudes. The fact remains that he gave basically the speech that Pam Bozanich gave to the jury, the first jury. What he left out was that there were two juries in that first trial, and both juries separately, one for Lyle, one for Eric, more than half voted not guilty on murder. So we've now trotted out this idea that somehow they're liars back then, and so therefore we shouldn't deal with the new evidence. But they weren't the only ones who were called liars, basically, because the habeas is based on two pieces of evidence. It's based on a letter that was written by Eric to his cousin Andy, and it's based on a declaration by a gentleman, as you mentioned, from Menudo named Roy Rosello. Well, he didn't really deal with, and the habeas doesn't deal with, Roy Rosello, because they can't, because Roy Rosello, they said something that made no sense, the habeas said, because again, they didn't know about Roy, that couldn't go to their state of mind.
So our audience, I want to just make sure our audience knows, Roy Rosello was the boy band member of Menudo who came forward and said, hey, Jose Menendez did this to me too. So he gave some credibility publicly to the argument that Jose Menendez was a child sex abuser. So I just want to make clear when you make comments about his name, that's who that guy is.
And right, and for those who don't know, Jose Menendez was an executive at a record company. Menudo was signed to that record company. For some reason, the habeas response that was filed, and Mr. Hochman, who was parroting that, said, well, the boys didn't know about that then, so that couldn't have been the reason that they did the killings, and which is beside the point. The point is, no, here was a third party who has now identified Jose as the predator who raped them, and on top of it, this third party, Mr. Rosello, said it happened in their house. And why is that significant? Because he felt he was so safe in his house because Kitty was protecting him, protecting Jose, that he could take somebody who wasn't his son there. And remember, this is the same guy who there was credible testimony from other relatives that there was a hallway rule where you could not go down the hallway. Kitty was the enforcer if Jose was in the room with one of the boys. So that was nonsense. And then the letter was really infuriating because the letter was found more than 10 years after Andy Cano had died. It was in his effects, and it was found by a journalist in the house, mind you, of Jose's sister. And Jose's sister then talked to Kitty's sister, Joan, and said, look what I found. And Joan realized the significance and had Marta, Jose's sister, in blue pen initial the back of it. And guess what? I gave that copy with the blue pen initial in a declaration to the DA. They acknowledge that it was an original a year ago. Today they don't. They don't acknowledge also that Joan Vandermolen testified about this 14 months ago under oath and said, I recognized how important this was when we found it. And mind you, Lyle and Eric had been in custody for over 20 years. They had no hope at that point. They weren't trying to do an appeal. All of this was really kabuki theater today. The habeas that was filed today that I got 1 minute before the press conference is the almost virtually identical habeas that was going to be filed by the same group of disgruntled internal prosecutors that were back then in the DA's office or have survived since and are still there today, including one John Lewin, who just spectacularly lost this week, Aesop Rocky. So this DA's office is, they're not only replicating the 90s in their attitude, they're replicating the 90s in starting to be that they can't win the cases.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your screen. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.